Washington got a couple of intriguing depth commits.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back into another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's the site editor with Athlon Sports Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen today. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And Lars, as you so kindly reminded us in the opener there, Washington did get two intriguing depth commits where both these guys, we're gonna start with Treston Kini McMillan, the quarterback. They're both promising players. They both have a lot of upside, but they both certainly have areas to improve on. And with Treston Kini McMillan, I feel that this one is one where he's a little bit of a late bloomer. He had a really nice junior season. We're going to start there where he's a 3-star quarterback commit out of Hawaii, and he will be joining the class of 2025, which is really nice because you and I both really like Dash Beerley. We've both, watched his film. We like it. I like Treston Kini McMillan's film too. What's the first thing about just this commitment where it comes maybe the roster or anything that stands out to you?
I'm going to take this from somebody on Twitter. I don't remember who exactly it was, but Short King U is here to stay. Damon Williams, Treston Kini McMillan. Dash necessarily isn't as short. He's closer to, I think, 6 foot, maybe 6'1" if he grows into it. But clearly Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty have a type. Even Noah Fafita at Arizona was not that much above. I think it was, 5'11", 6 foot, somewhere in that ballpark. But when you look at Treston Kini McMillan's film, just a touchdown machine. And the thing, when you look at what Jedd Fisch saw, what we saw from Damon Williams and what the offense kind of wants to look like in 25 and down the road, you have to have a little bit of both. He's really accurate as a passer, completed over 68% of his passes, which is one thing Jedd Fisch put at the very top of the list when we talked to him at his post-introductory press conference back in January. He said, the one thing that you have to do is completion percentage. I don't care if you're 6'4", or you're 5'9", or you're 5'6" like me. Just complete the ball, get the ball out quickly, and let the skilled players, make things happen in space. You don't have to have this rocket arm that, we were so used to having Michael Penix have. So when you look at what he brings as a dynamic playmaker, you have to be intrigued. Now, to your point, he does come with Dash Beerley. So what this does is, as I mentioned on our show last week, it staggers the group. Where Dash Beerley will come in January, and I would expect McMillan. I haven't talked to him, so I don't know if he's enrolling early, but I would imagine he comes in either in March or June, which allows that depth to get a little bit more staggered.
So I agree with everything you said there, except one thing. And that's the rocket arm part, where he really does have surprising arm strength. Where there are a couple people that I saw in different places compare him to Noah Fafita, and just in terms of he's short, he's definitely compact, but he's stocky, he's very well built, but he does have a really strong arm. And I really did enjoy his film. As you said, he is a dynamic playmaker. He's a fun rusher. And another thing that I really like about this take is that Jedd Fisch has identified the quarterback talent, and this doesn't, it certainly doesn't preclude them from taking, somebody in 2026 like Brady Smigel, the big top 5 quarterback out of Newberry Park, who seems to be very interested in what Washington has to offer. And it also doesn't rule out another 2024 quarterback, or just somebody out of the transfer portal is probably the better way to phrase that, where you can add somebody out of the transfer portal that probably has a little bit of experience. We saw Sam Heward go to Utah, where I know that was a name that a lot of Husky fans wanted to see come back. But somebody, in that same ballpark, where maybe it's an FCS guy who's looking to make the jump, or an FBS guy who maybe has a little bit of experience under his belt and is looking to make the jump to a Power 4 level that, is going to be willing to sit behind Will Rogers and then compete with Damon Williams, because that's what everything is kind of about right now. And it's something we're certainly going to talk about a little bit later, where that's something that Dennis Dodd talked about when ranking the top 25 teams post-spring. But Damon is sort of the measuring stick right now in terms of what we've seen from him this spring. And that's what everything's going to look at, just kind of look up to in 2025 and beyond. So getting a guy like this is really fun because he can learn from Damon, as can Dash Beerley. And, with another veteran in the room, it just adds so much depth that is really, really sorely needed at this position.
General Booty. Just say the name. General Booty is your backup quarterback. That solves all the
I would
problems.
love
Okay,
that.
no, but you want emails. But I mean, imagine the Simply Seattle shirts. Oh my God, those would
That'd be
fly off the
fantastic.
shelf. That
That'd
just
be fantastic.
be beautiful. But what this does is it gives the coaches a lot of competition. Whether now we both expect Amon to progress as a sophomore and likely earn that starting job, but even if he doesn't, when you bring in a veteran and you have some of these younger arms that play a similar style that he does, it really does allow true competition at that position where Damon is not just going to be handed the job. Now, will he end up likely being a starter? More likely than not, right? But
Absolutely, yeah.
when you look at the type of skill set they're bringing in, that's why you want to bring in all three of those types of guys, and why I would imagine maybe the transfer quarterback that we allude to is more of a pro style. Just help the quarterbacks understand the playbook, be a good teacher, like a junior college quarterback. So in that similar mold where they're not going to threaten per se Damon starting next season, but they will encourage him, test him, help him grow in the classroom. Not that he needs any help. But it's why you have Will Rogers this year, because you could easily turn the ball over to Damon right now if you don't want to keep Will Rogers. But having such an experienced guy with over 12,000 yards in the SEC, you'd be dumb not to take that advantage. But really, aside from Will, all these quarterbacks are the same in terms of their style and playmaking ability, which makes me wonder how Jedd Fisch will kind of balance implementing the offense this season and then still leaving some meat on the bone, as Brian Grubb and Scott Huff used to say, for what 25 can be and the offense could look like with an even more dynamic quarterback than Will Rogers, because Will and Damon, as we saw this spring, are not the same. But it's okay to have a little bit of different quarterback play, but clearly there's a type that Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty have identified in the high school ranks.
And just kind of to play off of that, it's something that we got to watch just up close and personal last season when we saw Hayden Moore get hurt and Jedd Fisch and Jimmy Doherty had to turn to Noah Fifita and that happened against Washington. And that was the thing where it's, okay, us covering Washington, not Arizona, we didn't know much about Noah Fifita at the time. And then watching him play, it's a very similar play style. There were a lot of those similarities there. And, now that we have to talk about Jedd Fisch, it feels very relevant to just watch what that was, because, before everything happened, when Will Rogers in the transfer portal and everything like that, it was, will Noah Fifita come up here and run the offense in a similar fashion? So it feels like he certainly wants to carry on that legacy in dual threat quarterbacks. He's talked about he loves guys that make plays off structure and make it look nice, guys that can tuck it and run, where that's something I don't think that, we as people who've watched the Huskies for so long have seen in a long time, where the last guy that I truly remember being willing to tuck it and run on a consistent basis, probably Keith Price, where Jake Browning certainly did it at times, but it didn't look anything like it did when Keith Price was playing quarterback. And that would be really nice to see under Damon Williams, under Dash Beerley, Treston Kini McMillan, whoever it ends up being. But you're right, Lars. He does have a type for these athletic guys, and it's fun because it is a completely different offense. And one thing where, giving all these guys time to sit and develop with Damon this year and then those two guys next year, it lets the offensive line get better as well, where that's just such a huge part of this equation. And with that being said, Treston Kini McMillan isn't the only guy who's committed to Washington. We got to remind everybody that this could not be possible without our good friends over at Yahoo Finance, because when it comes to your financial future, you think you've done it all. You've saved, you've researched, you've invested all that you can. Now you need to take those investments to the next level by using what every financial great uses, Yahoo Finance. More than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools you need in one place, because they are the #1 financial destination, producing a holistic look at the financial news cycle, including breaking news, original editorial perspectives, analyst rankings, independent research, customizable charts, and so much more. With a community of over 90 million users each month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. For comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com, the #1 financial destination, yahoofinance.com. That's yahoofinance.com. Lars, Washington also early on Tuesday got a commitment from former Michigan linebacker Hayden Moore, who hasn't played yet in his college career. He redshirted after being a 3-star recruit out of Aurora, Colorado in 2023 and went and played for Michigan. Had some big time offers, chose Jim Harbaugh and the Wolverines, won a national championship. We don't need to talk about that. But this is a nice depth piece where I don't think he's certainly going to have much of an impact this year, but I like his athleticism. I like a lot of the things that he showed on his high school film. And I think that, in 2025, he's somebody who could step into a role in the rotation.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. This is basically just filling the spot that Jordan Whitney created, where when he went in the transfer portal at the end of spring. And the thing was, Jordan Whitney didn't do necessarily anything in spring. So this, if anything, is a boost in overall what are you having in that player. Like, this is a terrible example here, but like, Madden or NCAA, you have a player that's, maybe 65 overall and it's now 72 overall. You're just leveling up in terms of the potential level of talent that he could have, because when you watch the film, to your point, he can play. He's a true inside linebacker, but he plays sideline to sideline, able to get after the quarterback rather easily. Now, part of that could be the level of play. Part of that also could just be his raw natural talent. So there was a lot more potential in Hayden Moore than there was that we had seen in Jordan Whitney. That's not to say that Jordan Whitney still can't make an impact somewhere in college. We didn't see that even in his time in high school. There wasn't necessarily that same level of production, where I know somebody highlighted on Twitter in my story on Alphon Sports, where he had 308 total tackles in 2 seasons. That alone just tells you the level of production you're going to be getting. To your point, He didn't have that level of production last season in Michigan. I think there's a reason for that, because Michigan had a rather great defense last season, and he was not.
Heard
that. You could ask the same question of why didn't Rashid Williams or any number of the receivers get on the field last year. Well, there were some dudes ahead of him that happened to be pretty good. So that necessarily isn't a concern that he didn't play as a true freshman. It also does kind of tell you that Robert Ballin needed to add some depth in that room, whether it was just in terms of at linebacker, maybe a special teams body. And so getting a guy with that high level of experience tells me that was just a leg for like swap there.
That's certainly what it feels like. And I don't want to sound like any of this is taking away from Hayden Moore, because I do like his talent, but it's more what's ahead of him right now, where Devin Bryant is somebody who we saw get on the field a lot early on. He obviously hasn't practiced this spring, is dealing with, he had surgery on his foot back in January, February, not too long after the national championship. So he's missed all of spring practice. We saw Jordan Whitney rehabbing from an injury through most of spring practice, but ahead of him, there are 4 seniors right now in Carson Bruner and Alfonso Tupatala, and then Brian Parham and Drew Fowler. So there's a whole lot of just veteran experience at the position. And especially with Carson, we don't see that as a guy who's going to be rotating very often. So there's really only one linebacker spot that, you might even be able to potentially step into the field at. So it really does look like a depth piece. And then the thing that when I look at it, my question is just, how much do I think this could impact the class of 2025? Because when we talked to Robert Balla a couple of weeks ago at the end of spring practice, he was very complimentary of Kamori House, who was the one linebacker take in 2024. We really like what he can do. He certainly doesn't look like a guy who's going to get on the field a lot this season either. And that's mainly due to his size at the moment, where it looks like he needs to add a couple of pounds, and maybe we'll see him in a game or two, but he's not somebody who I expect to take up a role until next season at the earliest. But to answer my own question, and I'm going to let you go off on this too, I don't think it's going to impact the 2025 class that much, where I wouldn't be surprised if Washington takes 3 high school linebackers. And that's something I know I've been saying that for a while, where, if it's Zadrius Randy-Sale, if it's Christian Thatcher, if it's Mark Hennecore, Cyrus Polu is the other guy who's coming up on an official visit. If it's 3 of those 4 guys, I truly wouldn't be surprised, because you can still have a guy like Hayden Moore compete for a spot next year with Zadrius Randy-Sale, with a Christian Thatcher, with all these guys. So I like this take, and it doesn't necessarily, make you more hesitant about taking guys in this next recruiting cycle.
Yeah, it's why it's a like for like swap, because this doesn't, Jordan Whitney not transferred out, you don't have that scholarship spot to add.
Yeah.
That's why this doesn't impact the 2025 class. But the one thing to also keep in mind is with both Devin Bryant and Hayden Moore, you're looking at these guys as potential special teamers, either on kickoff coverage, punt coverage, whatever you want to do. because they're not going to see the field, but you don't want to just have a guy stand on the sideline for 2 straight years. And not saying that's the case with Devin Bryant, but that would be the case if Hayden Moore didn't see the field. So I would imagine some of these guys probably get maybe 8 to 10 games. And I say that as that includes special teams and reserves. You'd have to imagine the first couple of games against
Weber State, Eastern Michigan, Wazoo.
No. I couldn't remember the first one because I knew Wazoo was the third. But Weber State, you would imagine those two guys would get a decent amount of chances, knowing those games should be put away in the first half. And since you're going to get a limited number anyways, you're going to get those times. But that's why these guys can come in and be an impact on special teams. And that's why when you look at the film, he's a guy that has so much range on the field. He's athletic enough to play on special teams. He isn't just a big thumper, or he's too scrawny to play, kickoff coverage and things like that. He seems like a guy who can shed a block pretty easily, get into a second level, and handle the things that need to be done on special teams. So when you look at, they're not going to see the field on defense, but these are guys, when you go back to the Chris Peterson days, those starters were guys on special teams. So if they're not going to be starters on defense, have them be contributors on special teams and get that. I mean, 2 years ago, Carson Bruner against Michigan State absolutely took somebody's life on kickoff coverage. Now he's a starter. Had Eddie not been coming back for a 6th year last season, Carson would be a 2-year starter. These guys that don't necessarily see the field early, that's okay, as long as you make an impact when your number is called. And that's we look at a lot of these additions, right? Kevin Green and Roger Seaver, as I said, was kind of similar situation where he only had 8 catches, but he had 8 targets. As long as when you make the most of your time on the field, that's all the coaches really care about, and that allows you, when you go into the spring 2025 with potentially 1 or 2 early enrollees, a linebacker, maybe another transfer, whatever you want to call it, you now have a leg up because this room after this year is going to be very, very young. So I'd imagine they'll probably go back in the portal maybe next season for a veteran, but that's why you want to get these guys experience any way you can this coming season. So that way you're not looking and saying, okay, Devin Bryant, you are now the biggest veteran in the room. I've had it. Like that would just be a terrible plan.
I certainly agree with you there. And then one more thing I wanted to hit on before we switch gears a little bit is just in terms of the transfer portal in general, where, as you said, this is the last scholarship at linebacker for this season. And that leaves, there are 5 outstanding scholarships now by my count. So the more I look at this, I think we're going to see at least 2 more on the offensive line. We'll see 1 along the defensive line, maybe 2. I think that it could be 3 offensive linemen. We'll see how things play out. 1 quarterback, and then there you go. That's basically going to be the roster for the upcoming season. And there's a lot of depth now. I think that there's still a lot of work to be done, especially along the offensive line. And that's, the jury's still out, and we're certainly going to have a much deeper discussion about the offensive line here in a sec. But I'm just, that was one thing that, has always been a question on both of our minds throughout this offseason is where are the scholarship allocations going to come in the transfer portal? Because we knew they were waiting for this period. Jedd Fisch told us that the coaching staff was waiting for this whole period. So we've seen some nice depth acquisitions at running back, at receiver, now at linebacker, at safety with Justin Harrington. So we've seen some depth acquisitions all over the field. And I'm just curious because those positions didn't necessarily need the starter talent. But now it's all right. All of that is filled out. Now you need to go get some guys who you believe can start or provide a little bit more depth along the offensive line.
And those guys are going to come out of a magic rabbit hat because when you look at the portal, there's not just a ton of available guys to fill those positions. But one thing I also, and again, this is a longer discussion for another day, but if the staff deems somebody else is worth taking, do you take a 3rd offensive lineman and somebody else? And like, if you take another receiver, for instance, I mean, Kevin Green probably takes the spot of Elijah Badger unless you really want to go get another receiver. So when you start looking at who have they brought in, who do they still need to bring in, could they go without another quarterback? And when I say that, you can bring in a walk-on that has some junior college experience if you get really lucky. And I'm not saying I totally agree with it, but you did mention if Will Rogers goes down the way Jaden Delora went down last season, you got Damon. And in reality, is that 3rd quarterback going to be worth salvaging a season and potentially stunting Damon's growth? Because if Damon comes in as your number 2, even with a 3rd quarterback, that's not the point. Actually kind of rather intriguing.
So that's not the point. The reason you need a third quarterback is because, and this is certainly nothing that we would ever wish to happen, but if DeMond ends up going down in that situation, then it turns into a major problem really quickly, because this is a team that is very talented at a lot of these skill positions. And with the offensive line the way that it is, that's not a situation that you can rule out. But that's really the only way to put it, where it's certainly nothing we would ever want to see happen. But if all of a sudden, if Will Rogers does go down, you're just one tiny thing away from disaster. And that's kind of the problem there. And Lars, with that being said, we're going to have a much longer discussion with the offensive line, because CBS has the Huskies ranked at number 18 in the country in their post-spring rankings. And we'll get there right after a message from our good friends over at FanDuel, because it's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 spent on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You can do that all by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook. And, I know we've been on the Celtics throughout the show. We're starting to jump on the T-Wolves bandwagon here a little bit. I think we should see those two teams meet in the finals. I think that'll be a whole bunch of fun, and you probably get some decent odds on that on FanDuel, so you should go check that out if you can. So, Lars, Dennis Dodd over at CBS Sports put out his post-spring rankings, and he has the Huskies sitting at number 18 in the country. Is that too high? Is that too low? Is that just right? What do you think?
Right now, it's too high. Because when you look at how do you is this a top 25 offensive line if you can name 5 starters for me right now? And I'm not being cynical, but that's the case. If you had gotten to Marcus Bryant, I would be more inclined to say yes. If Elijah Jaquette could gain, I could guarantee that he would gain 20 pounds and really just fill out that frame that he needs to between now and the start of fall camp. I even still at that point wouldn't say yes, because there's not enough veteran experience. I mean, you have without question a veteran quarterback to pull the strings, but Will Rogers didn't play an entire season at Mississippi State last season. And even if DeMond ended up, let's just say, in a clear competition winning the starting job, yeah, he could run more, but I don't necessarily think DeMond's best suit is going to be becoming a track star, avoiding so many sacks. And when you think about what this defense could do, yeah, this defense could do great things. But we've seen at Washington, I know it's a different coaching staff, but we've seen multiple staffs have a decent defense, but have nothing on offense. And that defense eventually over the season is going to weather. And you're talking about a 4-win season at that point. So for me, I still need to see the bodies added to truly, because I mean, they're top 30. I don't think they're necessarily that far out of the top 25. They're not 35, 40, 45, 50, but it's nowhere near close to the red zone in terms of, if Washington could add, the guys that we see them adding along the offensive line, then yeah. But if they end up having to take, an FCS lineman and kind of a, under the radar guy, take a flyer on a guy who has some starts, that's okay. But I can't be as convicted of that addition as I would be, a Power 5 transfer like what Marcus Bryant could have been.
So I certainly agree with you. I'm just going to play devil's advocate. I'm going to look at this from the other side and talk about some of the reasons why I think it might be fair. And I think it comes down to the experience and talent at some of the skill positions. When you look at Will Rogers, that's somebody who you can say, okay, yeah, if you give him a little bit of time, he's certainly shown that he can make things work. And next to him, he's got Jonah Coleman. He's got Cameron Davis, 2 very, very talented running backs that I'm really, really high on. I like that a lot. You look out wide, you see Denzel Boston, you see Jeremiah Hunter. Those guys are going to make some plays this season. We know that. And then on the defensive side of the ball, this is going to be an elite scheme. I really do believe that this is going to be one of the better schemes in the Big Ten. And along with that, there's some really nice talent on the defensive side. We just got done talking about Carson Bruner and the linebackers and how we think that group could be really good. If you can find a pass rush, if Zach Durfee can lead the way for you, and you can find a way to get some of these other guys rolling, whether it be a Lance Holtzclaw or an Isaiah Ward or even a Jaden Wayne or something like that, where you can get a couple of the other guys rolling in the front 7 and just back that up with Ephesians Prysock and Jordan Shaw playing really well, and Elijah Jackson taking the jump for a full season, then I think that could be fair. I know we've talked about this before. I have them going 8-4 right now, and I'm still, withholding judgment for the offensive line to see what else I might want to change before we make official predictions in August, whenever we might end up doing that. But the more I look at it, I understand the argument, but you're not wrong. There is so much that needs to be figured out on the offensive line. And I think that Garb and Millar coming back can still be a big part of that. I think that if D'Angelo Titiali can step in and play well, that would be great. I want to see what he looks like, especially at his size. I think that we could end up seeing some nice things from him, but that's something I'm really curious about. And then how are you going to fix that? Especially left tackle right now. Left tackle is the one position where after Chris Adams has gone to Memphis, how are you going to fix that? Because Sione Fasolo and Elisha Jaquette have promising frames, but they're not ready yet. And you need to find somebody who can play that position right now.
And that's the one position for me that I look at, because Nick Rumahe from Ohio State slots in a right guard.
Sure.
I know some people had him listed as a tackle, but I just don't see that making sense. I mean, if he's your left tackle, it's a great get. It's an Ohio State get, but that doesn't. I don't look at that and say, oh, okay, now because you're getting this guy with Power 5, experience, quote unquote, but that the two starts in 4 or 5 years does not cut it for me in terms of at left tackle. Now, as your, right guard, your third, fourth guy in your line, sure, that works for me, because, we've seen guys thrive at that positions in a lesser role. So not having that left tackle, to me, that's the problem. And even if for the sake of, to your point, devil's advocate, if you kick Drew as a party over to the left side, which again, we both agree we don't want him doing that, and he did not look as good on the left side as he did on the right side in spring camp. Not to say he couldn't get better, but I would just leave him for sake on the right side. But even if you did kick him over to the left side, now you have that same problem at right tackle. And it's just as bad, because truly your left tackle is supposed to be your best offensive lineman, theoretically. And when you look at how football breaks down, it really should be.
Sure.
Your best lineman right now is arguably a tackle that's healthy. And depending on our preference, your best lineman isn't healthy right now, and likely won't be for 24, and I'm talking about Landon Hatchett. So when I say that, there are a lot of other pieces where, if at full health, I would feel a lot better with both of those guys having a full season under their belt. But even with guard coming back and likely starting, that's a good piece, but still it's not a proven veteran experience, right? Where there's going to be some step back from the Joe Moore award-winning offensive line, just like we're going to see a receiver. It's going to look different, but how much does it fall back is where I am hesitant to say this is absolutely a top 25 team, because to your point, if they finish 8-4, I don't think you're making the top 25. And likely because you're going to have a couple of top 25 losses in there. Maybe
Sure.
If you upset a Michigan, maybe you might sneak in at 24 or 25, but I don't necessarily see that being the case at the end of the day.
So I certainly agree with you there. And that's where I'm really intrigued to see how this plays out over the summer. And it's all going to come down to that one position at left tackle, because one other position that I want to highlight, just as I talked about the front seven, is defensive tackle, where we haven't seen this Husky team have a defensive tackle who can make a true 3-down impact since Levi Onwuzurike a bunch of years ago. That was the last guy who I consider a true 3-down guy. He's certainly not Vita Vea, where nobody is. Let's be real about that. I love me some Vita Vea. But I don't know. Oh yeah, seriously. I'd like to see what Sebastian Valdez and Javon Parker can do in that role. I think that they've looked better throughout the spring, and certainly, you could chalk some of that up to the offensive line that they've been practicing against a bunch of true and redshirt freshmen, which again is fine, but what's that going to look like in the middle of October? Is Steve Belichick going to find a way to make sure that Sebastian Valdez can find a way to have 7-8 pressures in a game? Because if that happens, I think this team can look completely different. And that's one guy, especially where I really like Javon Parker. I think he's going to have a good year this year. But when I look at Sebastian Valdez, he's somebody who can truly make a huge impact, because we've seen him do it at the FCS level. And if he can find a way to just keep that production in a similar range, it's probably not going to be what it was, but if he can just find a way to get consistent pressure on the quarterback, that could really change the entire outlook of this team.
I couldn't agree more, but the one wild card for me is Voice Nufi. And you mentioned that he's not exactly your ideal 3 technique, but he's a guy that has so much versatility and shown that he can make a disruption in the inside or off the edge. So if you can maximize all three of those guys, Sebastian Valdez, Javon Parker, and Voight Tanupi, with Zach Durfee coming off the edge, and then you add in the depth rotation of Jacob Bandis, if you can, find some push up the middle, it'll just be a run stopper. There's enough depth at that position, and this is what we kind of, to tie the whole show together, you have to have depth, because yes, you need the starters, and yes, you need those impact guys, but we know throughout the course of the college football season, especially in the Big Ten, you're going to have injuries. And so having an Armon Parker, having a Jacob Bandis, having those guys, Bryce Butler and Russell Davis and those guys, Isaiah Ward off the edge, having all those guys in depth, that's how you survive the season. That's how you still end up 8-4, potentially 9-3, because of all those depth additions. You don't want to go from 2 starters to 2 redshirt freshmen, which we've seen at times, at various positions over the course of different coaching staffs. So the way that Jedd Fisch is building the team is promising. He's still got to finish it out, but all the pieces that they're adding are the right pieces. I don't think there's been a true, and that's including the long snapper, because as we said on yesterday's show, long snappers very much need them. Need them very much. I know it's one of those, but we can. It's the second quarterback debate of, do you really need a second? No, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. Yeah, you do.
Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you to all the everydayers for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We've got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. We're going to have interviews, draft stuff, recruiting stuff, all of the above. If there's anything you want to see, please feel free to drop it in the comments. We'd love to hear from you and just see what kind of ideas you might have for us over the course of the summer. And, with that being said, make sure you subscribe to us wherever you get your podcast, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. Leave a like on the video. Click that little bell so you never miss when we post a new one. Like I said, any questions, comments, concerns, show ideas, anything like that, please feel free to drop them down in the comments below. If you're audio only, please leave us a 5-star review. It all really does help us out. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will talk to you on Friday.